Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me as always, Greg Dutcher. Greg, what's going on, man?
All right, man. Have I ever podcasted from home in all of our history? Maybe.
Uh, yes, but I believe it was before we did video. So you did a couple of call-ins. There was one time I remember you were super sick.
Yeah, I had
Uh,
COVID, I think, or something. Yeah.
yes. And so you had decided that you wanted to go ahead and call in rather than meet. So I think this is the third time that's happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's
But now
right.
we actually get to see your house. This is the first
Get,
time we've seen your house.
get to see it. There's too much light coming into it. I'm sorry, it's blinding, the time of day that we're in, but I've chosen these beautiful curtains as the no, I haven't. I'm gonna shut up. Um dude, right before we went live or whatever we call it, I turned the camera. So yeah, I have a special guest with me. She hates me right now. It's cursing the day of my birthday. Hey, it's Lisa.
I do hate
Hi,
him.
Lisa. How are you?
Hey, Nathan, how are you?
I'm well. So, Lisa, tell me. I know that the greatest moment of your life, of course, was when you received Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Right,
Second greatest was marrying Greg, and
right.
be honest, this is your third greatest moment, right? Is joining
It's
us
up
on the
there.
podcast.
It's up there.
Yeah.
I need joy with me. That helps.
Yes.
That's right.
I like, Nathan, how you just didn't give her a chance to say that something else could have been her second greatest.
Maybe the birth of my children.
Yes, other than marrying me. I'm pretty sure one time she got this really awesome coupon at like Target that like tripled the discount, and that was a pretty good day. And then I'm in there somewhere, probably top 75, somewhere thereabouts.
Hey, at
And
least you're top 100.
oh yeah, hey, exactly, exactly. So I know, Lisa, this is not your normal. And then I will tell you, about 10 minutes before we started, Lisa goes, "What? This is video?"
This is video. I thought it was a phone call. So this is makeup free, mascara only.
Me
Lisa
too.
Dutcher. I was like, oh, okay.
Me too. If you notice, my hair's not laying quite right this morning. I'm
Right.
trying to get it just right. The metal plate in my head. I'm sorry, that's another movie. Um,
Not
but
yet, Greg. We're beyond the season at this point.
yeah, yeah,
We
for
still
sure.
got a whole nother year to go.
Yes, yes. But dude, if we waste any more time like this, we're going to waste an amazing guest opportunity to actually bring some credibility. I mean, Lisa's bringing credibility.
Very
Right.
She's she's here, but we have an amazing guest to really take us to the next level here. So
Yes. So happy to introduce Christine Chappell and a wonderful book that she has written, Midnight Mercies. I've got my funky background, so it's a little Greg's got it too. Excellent. So it's a little wonky, but Christine, want to thank you so much for joining us, and would like to turn it over to you to give a little bit of your bio. Tell us about your friends, family, what you do, and then with that, also leading into what kind of prompted you to write the book that we have with us today.
Well, all of this silliness in the first few minutes, and my microphone just completely fell off of my desk. So sorry. I'm like, oh no, it's my turn to talk, and my mic is totally knocked over. So if I just made a whole bunch of noises, it's because I was trying to reposition it. So anyway, yeah, talk
no,
about credibility. I can't even have my microphone be in the right spot. Okay, now for being serious. Yes. So thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I guess just a real quick background of who I am and what I do. I am a married mother of three. So I've been married to my husband, Brett, for over 21 years. We have three children, ages 18, 11, and 10. We have two dogs. We live in the upstate of South Carolina. And ministry-wise, I am an author, a writer, and also a certified biblical counselor and a podcast host for the Hope and Help podcast for the Institute for Biblical Counseling and Discipleship. And so, yeah, I think about in a nutshell, that's a little bit about me.
That's
that's awesome.
wonderful. Yeah, and we will. We're going to make sure that we link your podcast with our episode, so that afterwards people will have access to be able to jump over and listen to what you do over there, because I know that so many people will be able to benefit from, you were telling us before we went live, the authors and counselors and people who have just written on the subject that you interview. So I know that will be a tremendous help for so many people. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And so the kind of tagline, walking with God through depression and motherhood, told us that you have 3 children. Talk to us about what it was that led you to that process of writing this particular book.
Yeah, gosh, I think I always felt from the moment that I came to know the Lord a couple weeks after my dad died of cancer when I was 28, always knew that it was going to be part of my journey to steward my story, is what I say. And so part of my story includes a long history with depression, panic attacks, self-harm, suicidal ideation at times, an eating disorder, just a lot of different baggage in my past with regards to emotional challenges and things of that nature, counseling issues, things like that. And so, but I didn't realize, that some of my past struggles with depression, particularly as I struggled as a teenager, would continue to, as long as they did, to creep their way into my adulthood, and then even into my experience as a mother and as a wife. And so, I just have always felt that call to live into what Paul writes about in 2 Corinthians 1, to comfort others with the comfort that we ourselves have been comforted by God with. And so that has always been very important to me. And I think one of the reasons why I have chosen to share so much of my personal story, because years ago I read a quote, I think it was in the book Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands by Paul David Tripp, where he says that our suffering does not belong to us. And that was one of those lines, that have stuck with me for years. And I think that just kind of plays into my motive for stewarding my story, is recognizing that I'm not at the center of my story, that Jesus is. And so using those trials and that pain to testify to God's faithfulness and care in the midst of those times when he seemed like he didn't care, is really important to me. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about why I wanted to write this book, I guess, is because partly living into that call to comfort others with the comfort God had given to me, but also I think just to help to try to normalize some of these experiences that mothers are feeling and going through, to help them to know that they're not the only ones, that it's not that something strange is happening to them, but that when you dive into the scriptures in particular, you see men and women struggling with a lot of these types of issues: despair, hopelessness, weariness, and the like. And so there's just so much comfort and counsel to be had when we go and turn to the scriptures to see that, but most importantly, to see how God engages with people who are struggling in that particular way, because what we think he's doing and how he's dealing with us and what his disposition toward us is in depression, it can be skewed, right? We can be drawing wrong conclusions. And so these stories in the scriptures that I offer in Midnight Mercies help us to see a clearer view of the mercy and love of God in the midst of our struggles with depression.
Thank you so much, Christine, for your openness. I'm drawn to people like you that are just open, honest about it. And I've seen that as an upsurge in church culture, maybe in the last, Lisa, 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. We, our first church out of seminary was 97. And it's not that people weren't talking about it. Maybe they did, but it was little dribs and drabs, and I always felt like there was a larger conversation, because you run into people and then you have your own experiences and you realize this is a big topic. So I had initially vowed I wasn't going to say much and let Lisa do most of the talking. So I'm getting all my talking in now to kind of set up. I know we sent you some questions as well, and we might, depending on what you say, pivot a little bit and explore something as That's what makes podcasting so much fun, as you know. But Lisa, do you want to just share? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. Hope I won't get in trouble for that later.
No.
You,
No, Greg, you're going to get in trouble for it now.
In front of everyone who's listening and watching.
Yes, exactly. See, hopefully the audience will restrain Lisa a little bit from, calling me out too much. But Lisa, because that's been a little part, well, she's married to a dude that's had major depression. I talk about that all the time. I just decided years ago to not keep that hushed up. That's the arena where Jesus works in my life and has shown me things about himself that I maybe would not have seen. So she's been married to a guy with depression, but also knows a little bit about it yourself, depression and motherhood. And I wonder, Lisa, do you want to share anything by way of connection with Christine?
Sure. When I had an opportunity to look, I haven't read the entire book, but I've read some, and I love the format because you kind of start by the very personal experience that you've gone through and then kind of unpack a biblical analogy. And I found how long have we been in ministry together? 30 years?
About 30 years.
That it's probably one of the least talked about subjects, especially in terms of like small groups in churches or just one-on. I only can name maybe a handful of women or men that have opened up about these struggles. I think it is getting a little bit better, but not much. And I have a personal experience with depression and postpartum depression in particular. And my experience happened when Greg was a pastor and we were young. I was 26 when I had my daughter, and I didn't know what was happening to me because
neither did I.
We had an experience of infertility. This was a very wanted baby. And I just felt like my world was collapsing, like the rug was ripped out from under me. And I found that the OBGYN that I went to talk about it didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't have too many friends that could, maybe a little bit, but not to the extent. So I think that it's wonderful that you're kind of opening up this dialogue, because I think Christian women in general kind of keep it to themselves, but Christian women in particular hold it in, I think.
Well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that. And I neglected to say, I actually just released a mini book on postpartum depression, and where I can totally resonate with what it is that you're sharing, because I went to a doctor about 6 weeks after the birth of my youngest child, and similarly wasn't really helped all that much, and didn't really walk away with feeling like I was equipped to engage the mood swings, the troubling thoughts, the bodily overwhelm, and so I'm thankful, that more discussion is happening around these topics so that women can, be prepared, number one, going into motherhood with a little bit more of a realistic, right, set of expectations, and also I guess just feeling like, hey, this is a possibility that these heavy things could happen in motherhood, and there are others who have gone through it, and not to say that it's easy or that you want to be experiencing those things, but that there is hope and that there is help from the scriptures, from Jesus, right, in specific. So thank you for sharing that, because that is a very disorienting experience, I think, especially as a believer, to feel those things and to not know what to do, and to have to just sit and face it, to endure it is really a challenge for a lot of us.
Yeah.
My final prompt, and then Lisa, I'm going to let you work whatever questions you want,
Okay.
and Nathan and I will kind of listen. But Lisa has always said, Christine, remember, like in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, you always, I'm setting up. You said every book for the Christian woman said what? And I never noticed it until Lisa said it. Then I've heard a few other people agree with you on this.
Wake up earlier.
What wasn't every book like wake up at 5 a.m.? and you seek the Lord at 5 a.m. and
I think I'm aging myself a little bit here. Maybe it's changed, but in my, in those early years, I just felt like all of women's resources were some version of Proverbs 31 that inspired us to get up earlier and do more and work harder.
Mhm.
And
which when you're battling depression
is like kind of the worst message
is really
in a way, because it's not specific from person to person. It's very general and overly simplistic. And our God is not overly simplistic. So I don't believe that Proverbs 31 was meant to be, this is the part you can edit, Nathan, if I speak too much, but I think that's overly simplified a view of what motherhood and being a Christian woman, that's not all there is. And I think it can make people feel very worthless if they can't meet those ideals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a spot on assessment, and even if you're not a depressed mother, just any kind of, here's your simple 2 steps to always succeeding and being victorious in life is just not what we see in the scriptures. We don't see simplistic formulas being offered. Life is so much more layered and complicated, and everybody, as you said, Lisa, has their own stories and their own contexts in which they are existing relationally, bodily, spiritually, and financially. I mean, so to offer broad strokes, like, you would be doing a lot better in motherhood if you had your 5:30 wake up call, and from 5:30 to 6, you had your quiet time. Not to say that spiritual disciplines and spending time with the Lord are not critical, because that is, but the way in which that looks for everyone, will be different in different seasons. And then, of course, to suggest that maybe that would be the key to all of your spiritual struggles is an oversimplification that I think can be really dangerous for people who are walking through depression, because then what happens when they don't feel better after they've been doing what it is somebody said they should be doing? That it continues to heap on the shame, of, well, then there really must be something wrong. I really must be awful. God really must have abandoned me because I'm doing the things that people said I should do and nothing's changing.
Yes.
And that can just add fuel to hopelessness in a very dangerous way.
I agree. Well, I wanted to ask you, let me look at these questions that Greg has come up with here and decide. I think you've talked a little bit about your personal journey. So, well, this is a good one. Why do you think that depression in motherhood is overlooked in faith communities? Have you come up with any conclusions about factors that might be why that's still not quite up there with the other issues?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have like any scientific studies or things I could reference, but I mean, if we just kind of think together here on this for a minute, I think kind of falling in line with what we were just talking about is, the notion that if you are, so we're going to talk in the context of being a Christian mother, so if you are a Christian mother, is kind of like, well, these things should just be natural for you. Motherhood should just be natural for you, or you should just know how to care for your children or how to care for yourself as you are pouring yourself out, in the context of parenting. And so this attitude that it shouldn't be hard, right? You're redeemed, you have the Spirit, God's design for women in the context of the home and to bear children and to raise them up. And so why is this hard? And I think that just, whether that message is coming externally from the pulpit or from our community or from even our spouses sometimes who don't understand, the different layers and how difficult it can be. But then there's also a voice, our internal voice, where we might be under the impression that this shouldn't be hard for me. Why am I struggling? I had postpartum depression, my 3rd child. What in the world? I should be a pro by now. I know about all these things. Why now is this, such a difficult thing? And Midnight Mercies isn't specific to postpartum depression. It applies to moms of all ages and stages. But I just say that and offer that because I think just the perception and the expectations that Christian communities and even Christian women have on themselves, is just so not aligned with what we see, I think, in God's word, when we are able to more clearly observe how hard life is. And not only how hard life is in general, but how hard life is for God's people specifically, right? Life is harder for God's people. The scriptures prepare us for that. It's not life is easier when you're a believer. It's no. You go the way of the master, and the master's life was not a breeze. You went from suffering to suffering to suffering to suffering, right? And so we are also going to suffer and suffer and suffer on the way to glory. So I could go on and on about it, and maybe you guys have some, things you want to add to the conversation, but just a prosperity mentality, particularly an emotional prosperity mentality. And I think just maybe a flawed view of the sanctification process. And again, oversimplifying, problems like depression, I think can all kind of lead to just glossing over pain, glossing over sorrow, and suggesting that to have pain or sorrow or lament is somehow unfaithful. All those things can be layers to why this topic in particular may not be addressed as often as it ought to be.
Yeah, great answer. I think too, social media, where everybody's lives look perfect, like you hinted at, the health, wealth, prosperity gospel message has hurt. I think a lot of people thinking, well, if I was doing everything right, like you said, my life would be better and happier. I think that's really good. How did you choose the examples from scripture? What was your process? And because those were excellent, like, how did you get to that point?
Yeah. So every chapter in Midnight Mercies explores a particular emotional facet of the experience of depression. And so I open up the book and try to make the point that, look, it's great if you can identify I'm feeling depressed or I am depressed, but I think that as you kind of listen to the heart as it speaks, right, you can begin to identify different emotional facets to the experience of depression that are actually fueling it. And so every chapter we go through one of those emotions: hopelessness, weariness, sadness, anger, anxiety, shame, and loneliness. And in all of those chapters, we explore a biblical narrative. And so what I wanted to do was find in the scriptures cries from God's people that connect with what a despondent mom might also be crying. So for the hopelessness chapter, we go into Numbers 11 and the fit that Moses had, where he basically told God, I'm going to totally paraphrase this, but he basically said, look, you expect me to do all this? Where are you? Why are you not helping? If this is how you're going to treat me, just kill me now. I can't take it anymore. And I think I'm saying it kind of tongue in cheek now, but if you're a mom who's walked through depression, you probably can relate to some of that, right? He had a total meltdown. And I know I've had meltdowns like that. A lot of meltdowns like that. And so again, going and finding narratives where we hear the words, in the weariness chapter, we hear Elijah say, it is enough now for me, O Lord. I'm no better than my fathers. Just take my life from me. Like, he's weary. He feels like a failure, and so mothers can connect with those words and say, hey, that sounds a little bit like me today. I feel like a failure. I feel like I can't do this anymore. I feel like I don't have anything else of myself left to give in this situation. And I could go on and give more and more examples, but that's how I selected the narratives, was to find characters in the scriptures, historical characters, people who really lived, who really had meltdowns, who really had despair and hopelessness and anger and shame and anxiety, all the things we experience in depression. And then we get to see God personally engage that person in real time. And we hear what he says, we see what he does. And typically it is not what we would have done in that situation if we were helping someone who was having a meltdown, right? Because our responses to someone who's saying, oh, I just can't deal with this anymore, I can't take it, would be like, oh, buck up and, just pull it together, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, stop being so selfish. This is not how the Lord engages people in their desperation. And so Midnight Mercies in every chapter helps us to, like I said earlier, see more clearly God's disposition toward and his dealings with those who are suffering a lot of the different emotional facets or the emotional overwhelm that a mother might also experience in depression. And when we observe those stories, we get practical counsel for next steps, but we are also comforted in knowing that our God is merciful to us when we are struggling in these ways.
And our experience is common.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, God put these stories in the scriptures for our instruction, for our benefit, for our encouragement, that we might have hope, right? He didn't put these stories in there for us so that we would despair. He said, yeah, I know this is what you guys are like when you're desperate. He said, here, have some stories that help you to understand a little bit more about how I view you in these moments so that you can take heart and take courage and do what it is that I'm calling you to do in the next moment. So yeah, what a great God we serve to care for us so intimately through the scriptures. It's really remarkable.
Christine, I am going to share just a bit from your book for those that might be just joining us or tuning in now. Midnight Mercies, Walking with God Through Depression in Motherhood with our guest, Christine Chappell. This was meaningful to me. I've, at least 2 or 3 years now, Nathan, been in the process of preaching through Mark's gospel, which has been really rewarding for me personally. And I sort of go off and on when Christmas comes up, or, we take some breaks. But not long ago, I did the passage that you make the basis of your, I believe, chapter 6 on shame, which is a really, really poignant section. And you tell the story of the bleeding woman and how she reached out in desperation to touch Jesus' robe. So just to give viewers and listeners a sense of your writing, which I think is really crisp and good and spot on. I love what you say here. You say, what a scene. For this untouchable woman to contaminate the crowd was bad enough, but to make a move toward Jesus from behind and touch him, now that's desperation. And yet, as one commentator suggests, there's no hint of cynicism or resignation in her story. Fear did not prevent her from acting in hope. And then you say fear did not prevent her from acting in hope. We have seen examples of hopeless desperation in previous chapters. But here we find an example of desperation and hope in coexistence. When we're tempted to hide, there is somewhere else to go, but away. Shame needn't propel us to despair. Another option exists. Wish I had that when I preached that passage, Lisa. That would have been a really great quote to add. And just to say, I promised I'm going to stop and let you get back to the questions, but I love that the way you wrote this, where you find the stories in scripture, and I'm just going to echo everything you said, because God seems far less comfortable with our mess, our lack of having it together than we are with ourselves or often with each other. And I think that, apart from your great insights in the book, just that takeaway itself, oh my goodness, story after story, where we find people in these really messy, painful, raw circumstances. So just had to drop that in there and give our listeners and viewers a sense of Christine's writing. But take it back, Lisa.
Well, what we've talked about kind of like the big picture, and trying to stay away from the practical steps, in a sense of, as of what we've talked about, that it's more towards looking towards God and his scripture and finding this commonality. But that being said, having gone through all of those things that you listed at the beginning in your life, do you have suggestions or steps that women or anybody in the church that's struggling with any of those things, postpartum depression, anxiety, panic attacks, eating disorders, what do you think is like kind of a first step or some practical steps that people could take, and how can the church help facilitate that?
Yeah, well, what I'm going to say is maybe an urgent first step. And the trick with it is that it's probably one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult step. So that in and of itself, we could probably talk about. But I open up the book Midnight Mercies with the hopelessness chapter and that scene from Moses in Numbers 11. And I do that because in that moment where Moses was just having a total meltdown, I mean, he wanted to die. He's just like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this anymore, God. You are asking too much from me and you're not helping. So how do you expect me to do this impossible thing you're calling me to do if you're not going to help? Again, paraphrasing. But God's response to Moses in that moment was not, here's 20 things you should do to chill out, right? He's like, here's one thing I want you to do right now is go find other people. Go rally up a group of elders, okay? From this moment, go round up a group of elders. And when you have that group, I will come down and talk to you there and give you next steps. And so in the middle of Moses's meltdown, which, even we can draw a connection to depression and motherhood, when you feel like you cannot possibly go on anymore, where you feel like God is asking you to do too much with too little, and it doesn't seem like he's helping. What do? We may even feel like we want to die because it seems like there's no other way of escape or burden relief readily available. God says, look, go find someone else to share this burden with, and I will come and talk to you more when you do that, right? And so for me, in my own story, I correlate hopelessness to a house fire because I lived through a house fire during the writing of Midnight Mercies. And so I pulled that life experience into this. And when you think of, depression and motherhood, a mother may feel like like you said earlier, Lisa, that like your whole world is being ripped out from under you, or to say it another way, like your whole world is falling apart or burning to the ground and you can't do anything to stop it. And you don't understand what's going on. How did this fire start? And you're just trying to figure out, what should I have done to prevent this fire, to prevent this problem in my life? And what we need most urgently in those moments are those spiritual first responders, just like we need to call 911 and get the firefighters there to put out the fire. And in depression and motherhood, you are not going to extinguish the hopelessness that you feel on your own. You're just not going to be able to do it. You cannot put out a burning house fire all by yourself. You've got to call the first responders. And similarly, in depression, you're not going to extinguish the fires of hopelessness on your own. God gives us other people to help us in those moments because we're not seeing clearly, we're not thinking clearly, we're tired. There's all kinds of different pressures externally, fears internally. We need help. And it's not a sign of failure to need help from outside of ourselves because God has built us that way. He has built us to need help from outside of ourselves, first and foremost from him, right? But then also from his people. And so now what makes that difficult is that interacting with people is probably the last thing you want to do. So it's this catch-22 of, okay, well, God says I should go and talk to somebody, which, would maybe under normal circumstances not seem so scary, but in the context of depression, somebody, a mother may have previously reached out and been misunderstood or mishandled in her pain. So now there's this protection mechanism, right? Of like, well, I've tried that. It didn't work. It actually went really badly for me. I don't want to try that again. And so I'm just going to deal with this myself. I'll be able to get over it. I'll do better. Whatever it is we try to tell ourselves to avoid, doing what it is that God is telling us to do sometimes. And there are a lot of legitimate reasons. I'm not saying that those things aren't painful and those experiences of being misunderstood or mishandled aren't real. But at the same time, Mark, you just read, or not Mark, I'm sorry. Oh, I just had a brain fart.
No, you're
okay.
totally fine.
Oh, because you said the book of Mark.
I said in Mark. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. So, Greg, what you just read, fear did not prevent the bleeding woman from acting in hope. And I think that is relevant to this context, even of what is that next step. It could just be sharing this burden of despair and hopelessness with someone and having our fear of rejection or fear of being misunderstood or mishandled not prevent us from taking that next step in hope, which is to engage someone that we trust, that we recognize as a safe, person. And I recognize too that, look, sometimes we don't have those people in our lives. And so there are a lot of reasons why this is a difficult first step, but I think the overall, and I'll wrap this up here, but the overall point I think that I make in the hopelessness chapter, which is relevant to this conversation we're having about connecting with others for help, is to recognize that God is not asking you to suffer this alone. He's not expecting you to know how to fix yourself on your own. He's not expecting you to get it together on your own strength. So even if we have, practical stumbling blocks that may make it more difficult for us to seek help in the context of community, it's important for us to understand that it's not God's expectation that we suffer by ourselves, that he has built us to be buoyed, I guess you could say, by our connection with other believers, so that we can take heart and have safety in an abundance of counselors. So anyway, that was a long answer, but that'd be the thing I would say.
I think that's from my own experience. I didn't, in some ways I look back and think that I just kind of came through it. I don't think that I had the best experience in terms of this and this and this helped. But I will say my experience resonates with yours, because the one thing that I found helped when the postpartum was so bad was my mom. Mm-hmm. And when I was alone, I was like, oh, I can't be in this house anymore. So I would it probably wasn't the best for the baby because, her sleep schedule was disrupted and all of that, but I would put her in the car and I would drive through, the tunnel to get all the way up to Hartford County from where we were, from the city. And I would just spend the day with her. It wasn't good to be alone. It wasn't good to be alone. And I don't think that anybody who's going through depression wants to be with other people, like you said, but it probably is the most important.
Yeah.
And they probably help you then. They see you and they're like, look, you really need a shower. Look, you need, let's get you to a doc.
Right. And I think I just want to add two more, I think, important points, because it may be a comfort to those who are listening, who are maybe in this position right now. Number one point, I hope I'll remember number two. My memory's not good. Number one point is that, when it comes to isolation, that is a device of the enemy. Mm-hmm. Satan will have you question, did God really say it's not good to be alone? Did he really say that? Did he really mean it? Because, you're strong in yourself. I mean, you've got this. You could totally just sail through this low period of despondency. No problem. I mean, we've got to listen and begin to ask. We need to ask God's help to discern the voices, right? Because if we are thinking in our heads, did God really say it's not good to be alone? I'm pretty sure I can just manage this on my own. Who's that talking? Because that's not Jesus talking. Right. And so we want to recognize, and it is a step of faith to say, God, the last thing I want to do is talk to someone right now. I recognize, however, that in this moment, this is the next step you're putting before me that stewards myself as I belong to you, right? I'm not my own. You bought me with a price. And I'm going to glorify you in my body by taking this body and talking to somebody about what I am feeling. And so anyway, just to recognize that there's certainly spiritual warfare going on in this, particularly with despondent moms in this area, I think is helpful. But the number two point, I did remember it, is that if you don't have somebody to talk to today, right, talk to the Lord. Just as you would talk to that friend over a cup of coffee and pour out your heart to that friend, God invites you to pour out your heart to him because he is a refuge for you. And I've tried to explain what this means to my daughter, who's about 10 years old right now. And I talk to her like this. It's like, do you know how to write in a diary? Do you know how to say, dear diary, today this happened and I feel this and that and I'm so upset because this. If you can write to a diary and pour out your heart to a diary, you can talk to the living God about what is on your heart. You already know how to do it. You're just changing the object of who it is that you're talking to. The diary is dead. The living God is alive and with you. And so those would be my two encouragements, because I realize, again, because of the difficulty of connecting with others in this context, somebody may not have someone to reach out to right away, but Jesus is the ever-present help in times of trouble. He is always there and ready to listen, even if you're upset and your anger is directed at what he's doing. You need to take that next step and at least begin to establish that line of connection with Christ, because there's not always going to be somebody there to listen to you in your moment of need, but he is always there.
Mm. Christine, I just want to say I'm so excited for, I know we're concentrating on women, but I love how you've broadened it to include everybody. Lisa knows this well. Nathan knows this well. I hit a wall at the end of 2017, went on a 4-month sabbatical that the church was kind enough to give me beginning of 2018. And you can just say, at least remember the first few days, our daughter, who was home from college break at that time, what was Sam then? Maybe 21, 20, somewhere thereabouts. She said, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I was just sitting on my chair and I was playing Yahtzee on my phone. I'm happy to say that's not all that I did, but that probably didn't do a lot for me, did it, Lisa? Because I didn't want to do anything. I was just so blah. And I had a great counselor that we both know, a friend of the family named Bob. By the way, I had a counselor named Bob, which makes me feel connected to Bill Murray and What About Bob? But that's a whole other story. But what you just said about, I didn't understand what Lisa was going through. I mean, I wanted to help, but it was new to me. I was a young guy in my 20s as well. And your mom, who passed away just about a year or so ago, was a tremendous help to you. And I don't know if you would say she fully understood it. She certainly did better than I did, but just the togetherness, and you're right, to have somebody to talk to. And I'm happy to say that same baby you were worried about is fine. She's 26 and she's fine. Somehow God got her through it.
We don't have to do it all perfectly. They don't have to have perfect naps. They don't have to be breastfed. There's so many things that society and the church tells us that we have to do that at the end doesn't make any difference if you just love them and show them God. And I
point them to Jesus. Yeah. That's what we just try to continue to point them.
I tell women at church all the time that are the little babies that I see the look on their face. They're so frustrated. They just think that everything has to be a certain way. And I'm like, it doesn't.
Yeah. And the scriptures remind us that the Lord's commandments are not burdensome.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so much freedom and grace that God gives to us because Jesus did all the things perfectly on our behalf because God knew we wouldn't be able to, right? And so he gave us a perfect deliverer, a perfect savior, a perfect redeemer so that we could rest and not have to be slaves to anything else other than the commandment, right? Which is to love him and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And if you're doing those two things, then everything else just kind of takes care of itself. Not to say that life is easy or anything like that, but at least you can know that before God, you're doing what he's asking you to do. And there's a lot of freedom in that fact.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know we are nearing the time. It has gone very quickly, Christine, which is a testament to the topic and your handling of it. I know Nathan's going to probably take the final word here, but again, this is something, Nathan, we want to give away.
Yes, two copies.
Two copies to listeners, viewers. I'll let you handle that. But Nathan, you've been the quiet man in this podcast, the observer of all things. But I figure we'll kick it back to you to close this out.
Yeah, no, thank you, Greg, and thank you so much, Christine, for joining us. It has been such a pleasure. Before we kind of take care of some end of the show things, we want to give you an opportunity as we're closing down to really kind of have the last word. If there was something that we weren't able to touch on that you would like to share, we want to just give you, these last few minutes to share anything you would like within this time. So please, close us out with your wisdom.
Oh gosh, well here, I'm going to pass along some wisdom from somebody else that I read this morning, if that's okay, because I think it is really an encouragement. It was an encouragement to me this morning to think about it, but I'm actually going through a study of Ezekiel right now. I just love the Old Testament. And so I'm reading a commentary on Ezekiel that tells you something of how I spend my free time. But I love it. And so, but I love that the author points out to the fact that when God reveals himself to Moses, that he's talking about Moses in the context of the Ezekiel story, but he says that when God reveals himself as Yahweh to Moses, that name is indicating that God is sovereign, self-sufficient, and self-consistent. And those are all of the things that we're not. No, as a mother today, if you are regretting that, or you feel guilty, like a false guilt for not being sovereign over your family, being able to control everything that's going on in your world, even in yourself, you feel like you're out of control, your body or your mind is out of control, your children are out of control, everything seems like it's just beyond your control. If you feel that way, if you feel like you are not self-sufficient, that you don't have it in yourself to pull up your bootstraps and face the day, that you need power and strength from somewhere else, if you feel like you are not self-consistent like God is, meaning that you're up one day and down the next and you're all over the place, your emotions are a mess. Look, God didn't create you to be sovereign and self-sufficient and self-consistent. He alone is those things, which mean he's not expecting you to be. Right? How much mercy and grace is that? And just recognizing from just how God made us, that he designed us to be dependent, designed us to be weak and needy and limited in ourselves, not so that we would despair and grow hopeless, but that so that we would look to him to be those things for us and then rest in that truth that he is everything that we need him to be and more. And the commentator closes just with the encouragement, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that for believers, God is safe to trust at all times and in all places. And that is the God that you serve today as a despondent mom. He is worthy of your trust in the darkness at all times. And you can trust him, maybe not to deliver you today, but to be with you today, to walk you through that valley, and to know that your story will not end in darkness or even death, but it will end with light and life. And that is the hope that you can have.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Such a great word of encouragement. So thank you very much. As Greg said, we do want to give away 2 of these books. Thanks to Christine for writing it, and to P&R Publishing for sending us these copies to give away. Midnight Mercies, Walking with God Through Depression and Motherhood. You can email us, and in the subject line, put Midnight Mercies. You can go ahead and give us a shout out on iTunes, set up a review on iTunes, and mention this podcast specifically and how it helped you, or send us a message on Facebook. Just any way you communicate to us that you heard this particular podcast with Christine, and then mention the book Midnight Mercies, and we will put you into the drawing to receive a copy of this book. Remember, we're giving away 2 of them. So once again, Christine, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure having you. We hope that if you are willing, in the future, we could get you on again sometime, because this is always a pressing topic for so many people. We are, for the sake of when we are releasing these, it is January, and January can be very depressing for a lot of people. I mean, really, the holidays can be depressing for a lot of people for so many reasons, but January in particular, because you're coming down off of the high of things. And so I think, this is just such a timely topic for the season that we're in. Particularly, Greg, you always say it, this mid-Atlantic, the dreary winters, different than where I grew up, where we had snow all the time and it was a winter wonderland and loved it. But, Maryland, so.
I don't want to hear you, New Hampshire snob.
Dude, I'm in it with you. I can't claim that anymore. I've been, almost 20 years down here now. So
Dude,
I don't even have New Hampshire anymore.
When we were up there this summer, right, Lise, we really thought, is there any way the church would let me pastor remotely and just never come back. Elder team didn't quite jibe with that. They didn't resonate with that desire. But
Greg, for the sake of the gospel, I am willing to set up CFC2 in New England. I bear that burden. I will suffer for Jesus and do
yes,
that for the sake of the
yes.
gospel.
Nope. Honestly, dude, they'll probably be happy to get rid of us. Maybe they'll set us up there for a year or two and take it. But no, yeah. I mean, we've got Christine representing, the sweet South, you the wintry North, and we're just kind of stuck here in the middle. But no, it is a serious time, and I love that these podcasts we've got going on this month. Each author is addressing an aspect of sort of the doldrum moments in our lives, which is where we often live. It's not all fireworks and warm retreat feelings, as much as we wish they would be. So yeah, I'm very excited to see people get copies of this book. It's something we are going to promote quite heavily, Christine, because one, we love authors, we love those that serve with pen in hand. So can't wait to get this out to more people.
Thank you guys so much for the chance to be here today.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Thank you. All right. Until the next time, we just rock the Casbah.
Thank you again for listening to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Once again, please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you ever find yourself in the Forest Hill, Maryland area, please feel free to stop by at 135 Industry Lane, and you can get all of our service times and information at christfc.org.
These Go to 11